dedicated diachronic studies, and we have three presentations. The first of them is semi-automatic word level alignment for rotating psalters in Romanian, presented by Gînsac, Moruz, Mihai, Moruz, and Mădălina, Ungureanu.
Okay. Good evening. The motivation for this paper was forthcoming because of some issues regarding old Romanian language. It is worth knowing that the first Romanian text, the first text written in Romanian, predates the letter of Neacșu. So there are some Romanian texts available right now which were written in the 15th century. But the problem is that in order to do some rigorous analysis, we need to have the text in certain forms. Unfortunately, old texts in Romanian are not very well processed, with some notable exceptions. But most of the texts available are available as photocopies or facsimiles of manuscripts. And I've given here some of the more notable such endeavors. But the problem with these is that they are an image format, as such unsearchable and unindexable, and in Cyrillic script, which is pretty difficult to use for current processing. So we intended to find out how some of the earliest recorded texts in Romanian, which are the three rotasizing psalters, are translated, how they relate to each other in order to see the evolution of the Romanian language. And since the first books translated into Romanian, the first large texts translated into Romanian are religious texts, basically psalters, gospel books, and other such religious books. We started our analysis on the basis of these psalters because there are numerous versions spanning about 200 years. So there's about 15 versions spanning from the late 15th century up until the 17th century, which are worth analyzing. And there's some suppositions regarding their origins, their translation source, regarding the evolution of the Romanian language and the words used. And in order to do this, we have taken the three of the oldest books, which is the Hurmuzaki Psalter, the Psalter from Voronezh, and the Ștcheanu Psalter. And we have chosen for a preliminary experiment, for a feasibility study, three psalms, which were chosen so that they are representative in the sense that one of them, Psalm 142, is very often used in religious activities, and the other two, not so much. So we expected that the one that is most commonly used should be more infused with the spoken language, whereas the others should be closer to the Slavonian or maybe Latin original. And here I have given a page from each of the three sources we have described. As you can see, all three of them are in manuscript, and these are the photocopies available currently for them. The photocopies are good quality, but still, I can't read them. Most of all because I'm not a linguist. So, the first supposition the first operational idea we started from was the relations between psalters, these particular three psalters. It is supposed in literature that all three of them are based on a primary translation into Romanian, which is no longer available, but then they diverge slightly. And as you can see, the Ștcheanu Psalter, which is given below, is on a separate branch to the Voronezhianu Psalter and the Hurmuzaki Psalter. And we wanted to prove this with word level analysis, which is to say, how do these psalters align at the word level? So, in order to do this, we had to do some linguistic processing beforehand. It was carried out by my 3 co-authors, which is to say we needed to transform the Cyrillic script into Latin alphabet so that it would be easily understood and usable. And we have 2 possibilities to take into account. Transliteration, which is basically a mechanical replacement, always replace this symbol with that symbol. It works quickly, it has high precision, but it does not reflect the nature of the text, usually. Now, because the preferred version is transcription of the text, which is to say a certain degree of interpretation needs to be taken into account for example, phonetic peculiarities, or for the fact that sometimes the same letter may have multiple phonetic values. And I have some examples. And usually, as I have said, transcription is preferred and is more useful, and is generally the current standard in linguistics. Okay. So, there were first of all, some of the particular difficulties in transcription needed to be taken into account. For example, some forms of graphical instability, which is to say the same letter was not always written in the same way, or maybe the same phonetic value was denoted differently in various versions or time frames. And also, as Gînsac put it, the graphical fancy of the copier. You have to take into account the fact that at the moment of these psalters being written into Romanian, there was no tradition in terms of Romanian writing, which is to say everybody wrote whatever they felt was appropriate. So, some brief examples. For example, this particular letter usually represents the vowels or U, but it has to be taken into account some types of context, because it may denote either of them, and you need a human disambiguation for that. It's mostly impossible to do it automatically. Also, there are multiple letters for the same sound, for or U, as can be seen in the next example. And most of the time, you can tell which one it is, but there are some situations where the interpretation is not possible, as given in the example given below, which is to say, what was the particular pronunciation of the time, because that's what the graphical symbols should represent, the particular pronunciation of the time, given it's 500 years ago. It cannot be determined with any accuracy. So there are some ambiguities which need to be settled, as in stabilizing a certain convention. Also, there's usually some vowels may appear at the end of the word with no particular phonetic value. They are basically remnants from the creation of the words, basically remnants from the Latin transformation, from transformation from the original Latin words into the Romanian words at the time. For example, some words ended in U or I or U or which is usually non-phonetical. It's not pronounced. So during transliteration, most of the time it was omitted. So another particular difficulty for these texts is the fact that they are written in what is called scripta continua, which is to say there's no separation between words. It's written as a block of text, and there's no spaces between words. And the annotators, the linguists that are doing the transliteration, need to do the word separation by hand. And that's not as easy as it might seem, because there are some situations in which the separation is ambiguous. And I have some examples further on. And also, in order to make alignment easier, we need to have verses. You know, the Bible is split into verses. Unfortunately, psalters aren't split into verses, not even today. So we needed to do that by convention. So we chose a particular segmentation, which is based on the 1688 Bible. We have kept the original segmentation into verses from one of the psalters because it made more sense. It was more logical that way, but it was only just one instance of that. And after we got the entire text, all the 3 psalms, transliterated from all 3 versions, we went to word level alignment. We had a tool built for word level alignment for the 17th century Bible, the Bible of Bucharest, but it didn't work. It worked very, very badly because the types of variations were significantly different. So we needed to find some other solution, and we determined that a single type of similarity measure is not enough. So we used compound similarities. We used 2 similarity measures, which were multiplied and then weighed, and then we had some other issues to take into account. Also, we were missing, for example, part of speech tagging, which was available for the 1688 Bible through the Monumental Lingua Daco Romanum project, which is to say, you know what part of speech each word is. We didn't have that. We didn't have the lemma. We just had base text, which was a difficulty in itself. So, first of all, we chose one psalter as a pivot. We didn't want to align everything to everything because it would have introduced a degree of variability which we did not want. So we decided to use the Hurmuzaki psalter as a pivot. So the other 2 were aligned to it. And we did a combination of string distance and k-shingle similarity. We used the cosine distance and a longest common subsequence, which we then transformed into dissimilarity measures and then multiplied them together. And thus they weren't actually distance measures, they were just a dissimilarity score. Also, we wanted to take into account syntactic variability, and because of that, we negatively weighed words the further away they were from the pivot we're trying to align to. So, for example, if there may be some word sequence which was in another order because of syntactic differences, it was taken into account and it worked. And the results given by the purely dissimilarity measure we have created is given above. So the center verse is the Hurmuzaki verse, and the one on the top and on the bottom is from the Shkeiana and Voronezh psalters. And the arrows show the automatically determined alignment. And it works pretty well, not all the time, but it works pretty well. More than 80% of the cases are correctly aligned. Take into account, we only align verses which are equivalent. We don't go all the way through the text. And then we had some words which could never have been aligned through similarity measures because they are so very different. For example, in the same text, the red arrows given below show a lexicon-based alignment because the words Nila and Meserara are synonyms, but you can't align them automatically, not with our system. And also we thought it would be useful to do an alignment to the Slavonic version because one of the psalters also has a Slavonic version given. It's given in line, so you have one verse in Romanian and the next in Slavonic. And the interesting thing is that the Romanian version is not a translation of the aligned Slavonic version. They are different. So the Romanian version was translated from some other source, and the Slavonic version was added later. Okay, and also we highlighted those words which were not alignable. For example, the ones which are circled in red do not have an equivalent in the Slavonic version of the text. And given this, we did a study of, well, how does this alignment help us? Well, first of all, the starting idea was that, okay, let's see what the sources of these psalters are, because everybody says that Romanian religious texts are almost exclusively based on Slavonic sources, which is not true. First of all, translations into Romanian are very old, much older than is usually thought, more than 500 years old. We also determined that the Shkeane and Voronezh psalters are most similar in terms of words used, grammar used, forms of alignment. Also, we have shown that Latin sources were also used in the translation, because there are some words which cannot come from Slavonic. For example, miserarea, which is based on the Latin word miserere, which is mercy. Yes. Also, apogorâ, which is Slavonic in nature, is equivalent to a descinde, which is to descend. Descendere, from Latin. So it is very obvious that Latin sources were also used in translations of Romanian texts, of church texts 500 years ago. So it's not exclusively Slavonic. Also, we found some synonymic series which might help us in further studies. For example, in terms of identifying the original source of the translation, because the same word in Slavonic, which is given below, is translated as either nedejdui or upovoi, and the upovoi version is basically a calcation of the Slavonic term. It's basically unimportant to the language, whereas nedejdui is a synonym deliberately used. Also, there are some interesting forms of interpretation. For example, we have various synonyms given for the words, which shows that these translations are actually independent of each other to some extent. They were created separately, but they do have common sources. And also, one of the more useful and unexpected results we found was that it does clarify some cases of obscure writing. For example, in some case, the copier used the word Măriei because he understood that mother was C, basically. They sound similar. And also, it helps for segmenting words, because this particular sequence here may be interpreted in two various ways. Remember, the roticizing psalters do not use punctuation, generally. And because of this, that particular sequence of characters can be interpreted as either a noun or a verb. And it's a pretty large difference, I might say. So, comparing to parallel texts, you can disambiguate and you can find the fact that this was indeed a verb, because faptai is an inverse conjugation of the ai faptu, ai făcut, which is to say, you did. Okay? And also some remarks regarding translation on the grammatical level. Usually the past perfect is used in the Hurmuzatic Psalter and the past tense in the other two versions, which is probably a regional difference. Also, the present tense in Slavonic tends to be translated into present or future in Romanian, which is somewhat interesting. And there are some cases where the copier or translator wrote the Slavonic words as were, whereas in some cases they were interpreted, which is to say sometimes the translator was better acquainted with the use of writing in Romanian and sometimes not. And this also has to be taken into account when analyzing these texts. So to conclude, we performed a feasibility study for the alignment of these psalms. We want to align all the psalms in these psalters, all the ones that are available, because not all of the books are complete. And in order to draw some significant conclusions with regards to the origin of the texts and the linguistic makeup of the translations, we need to align with the other psalters, but also with some other sources in Slavonic, Latin, and also Hungarian, because the Hungarian language was also a source of translation for those religious texts in Transylvania. Thank you.
As I saw in some slides, I think you have used some semi-uncial versions of the.
I don't think
written by hand, but simulating the print. And this is
I don't
why
think that applies to such old texts. The notion of printing was not.
this seems to be either
No.
handwritten.
No, the thing is, these translations were written late 15th, early 16th century, so late 1400s, early 1500s. The printing press was barely invented, so there were no printed letters available in Romania at the time.
So
So it's just manuscript, pure manuscript.
good. Okay. So it's handwritten.
Yes, yes.
And this is why some words, they're not separate.
It was the style of writing at the time. It was the style of Romanian writing at the time.
Did not understand how did you segment the word boundary.
My co-authors did during transliteration. My co-authors also performed word segmentation manually.
Manually.
Yes, yes. You can't do it any other way.
Do you have any hints about automatic process on this respect?
Well, we need to do transliterations on the letters, and if you do transliterations manually, because there's no other practical way at the moment, you might as well do word separation at the same time.
I mean, supposing this would be done, how do you segment the word boundary?
Oh, it's pretty
It's not
complicated.
an issue that you...
It's not a trivial task because you never know. So, for example, in this case that I have given here, there's no way of automatically determining whether this is a noun or a verb, because you can't do POS tagging. You don't have any way of doing POS tagging because of the age of the text. And given this, how do you do? What choice do you have? So, or what do you choose? What is correct? So you need to do a glossary first, and once you have that, yes, it can be done automatically. That was one of the purposes of this alignment, because
we may discuss on this.
Yes.
The issue also increases.
Yes, exactly. But the thing is, transliteration at the moment cannot be done automatically, and I think all linguists in Romania would agree. I gathered more understanding. I was of the same opinion, but I'm starting to shift now, because I understood the process while working on this paper, on the research for this. There's no sure way of determining whether a letter is one version or the other, because it depends on an arbitrary interpretation, which is set at the beginning of the transliteration process, and all the transliteration is done in a similar way. If some other linguists do the same transliterations, they may come up with different versions of transliteration which are similarly valid. So that's something you cannot avoid. Am I right in saying what I said?
It's not, I don't think that you're talking about transliteration, but interpretation.
It's the same thing. Transliteration is interpretation.
Transcription.
Transcription. I'm sorry. I was thinking. Yeah. So transliteration can be done automatically, yes, but it's not as accurate because it doesn't find these particular peculiarities of the text.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
We found specific vocabularies in different regions, or they are kind of the same?
There do tend to be different words used in different versions. So for the three versions we have analyzed, there does seem to be a particular attraction to some words. But since we haven't finished doing all the psalters, we just did a case study, a feasibility study. Okay, we intend to do it all the way for all the psalters, all the 15 psalters. But we do think there are some peculiarities regarding the region where the text was written, the knowledge of the copier that was transcribing the text, and the sources available to the translators. Sorry, because there are, for example, some propensities. One version tends to use some Latin words; the others don't. So, yes, there are some peculiarities regarding language.
Now, one more thing. The clitics, are they concatenated to
Yeah, there's no punctuation at all.
no crackman.
No. Yes.
Well, concerning the alignment, I saw in your example that all the links
Yes.
are somehow parallel among them.
It's just a play on the length of the verses, because
So it's not
we don't expect them to.
underlying assumption.
No. There are crossed alignments. So changes in sequence of words.
I assume that this crossing is locally.
Yeah, because we did not favor far away matches. So the further away we got from the pivot we're trying to align to, the more we penalized the score of the similarity.
Yeah, well, I think that you remember our, Mihai work on alignment since ages.
Yes.
So it was original alignment algorithm due to Mehmet, which was competitive linking, which made assumptions for non-aligned or multiple words alignment. So this is valid for critics. The question.
Yes. In terms of non-aligned words, we fixed it sort of. We determined sure alignments, so alignments with high score of similarity. And in between them, we had words that are not aligned. But we had, because we were working within the same language, and this is an important assumption.
Yes.
So it's the same language. We were expecting that similar words are not far away from each other. They may be some words apart, but definitely not 10 words apart, because it would be something entirely different. And we're still talking about the same Romanian language, so it's not feasible to assume that the alignment would be so far away from each other. If there were, then the difference would be so great that it would not be relevant. We would find some words that are not aligned. Okay, these words are not aligned. Why? And we never found any case where the alignment was due to the very far distance between the pivot and the word we're trying to align it to.
Yeah, but even in your example, there was a pair with a distance.
We allowed the distance up to 10 words, but the further away it got, the higher it was penalized. It was negatively weighed. If the similarity was so great that the negative weight would not push it down low enough, yes, we do accept the alignment, but it's very rare. And we chose this example because it's basically even the same word sequence.
They can do like because they are the own possibility.
Yes. And you
can
yes.
Another origin. If there is only the only possibility of pairing, and the distance is.
Yes, if
they are to be.
Yes, that's a valid observation. However, it's a very dangerous thing to do for these texts, because not all the verses in all the versions contain all the words. Not all the verses are complete because of the difficulties with the manuscript. It may be damaged, and because of that we only had access to half of the verse. There were some cases like that. So in one particular instance, for these 3 psalms, one of the manuscripts only had about half of the verse, because the other half was missing, either not translated or because of the damaged manuscript or some other version. So it cannot be stated with any certainty that if a word is not aligned, then it has to be aligned to that one over there, because it may be possible that some of the text is missing, for various reasons. So it's a valid assumption if you're expecting to have the same semantic value for the entire verse, but it's not a true assumption for the sources we have at hand. So that's why we favored distance above all. Because if you have half a verse missing, you can't align everything. It's impossible. So we had to say, okay, this is too far away. We will not align it. Because otherwise we had too many false positives. And it threw off the entire alignment. Thank you.